I have a couple of friends who are church consultants with some impact in their life. One of them says that the primary ministry of primary way, in fact, I wish I could say this better, the primary way in which a pastor can impact his church going forward is through his preaching ministry. I think a lot of people believe that. My other friend says he believes that pastoral ministry is 75% administration. I don't know how many people believe that, but I'm not sure that either of them is correct. Both of those things are important in the life of the church, and it depends on your definition of administration as to whether or not I'm buying in on it. But I will say to you that the primary means of changing a church and developing a church is in your relationships with the people in that church, which in fact are impacted by what you say or portray over from the pulpit. So there's that. And it is certainly true that in phone conversations, perhaps where you're doing some level of administration in the life of the church, you're also building relationships. So they very much overlap. But I think that we really have to get serious about looking at what Jesus did, how he did it, how he led, and what he intended to do. You know from the very beginning that he said, "Follow me and I'll change you." And you know the first one, but there's 9 other ones that imply you follow me and you're going to change. And if you say you're going to follow me, you got to recognize that it's going to be a tough road. And he pushed back on people who said they would follow him. And the guy who said, "First, let me go bury my father," he said, "Let the dead bury their dead." Now, we don't know the whole story, but it seems like an insensitive thing for someone to say. But it wasn't insensitive. It was truthful and it was direct. The development of people in the life of the church has been a concern for quite some time. And we've had all kinds of discipleship materials, and there's lots out there. And I start by saying, discipleship isn't a word that's in the Bible. And somehow people have said, well, if you have this process and you get this phase right and you do this and do that, then you get the end result you want. My understanding is that that's kind of from Greek philosophy, this linear argumentation that we do and that we've adopted in Western culture. And I'm not against all of that. And I'm not against putting things together in lessons. In fact, I'm giving you one here now. But what I am for is understanding that it isn't a one-size-fits-all. Every situation is a little different. And what I see as I look at churches is that they somehow think that if they just kind of show up and go through the motions, as it were, that people will change. Well, they don't. They don't change that much. So we must understand that development is not automatic. It takes some intentionality first of all, on the part of the prime leader, but on also those he has following him, who he delegates to. So I'm going to say that today we are one of these off-the-campus things. As I say, this is the third time we've looked into the delegation chapter of Coleman's book, The Master Plan of Evangelism. And I just felt after last week, there's more that I needed to say. So I'm back, and I hope that you're going to stay with it and listen to the end. 2 weeks ago, we looked at Jesus sending out the 12, delegation. Last week, we looked at Jesus sending out the 72, delegation. But what we didn't do is look into the incidents where things were on a smaller scale than that. And most of the people who will pick up this video and watch it are living in a smaller scale. Most churches in North America are far fewer than 100 people in a given Sunday, and probably 100 people max in the field of view, in the 100 people who would say, "This is my church home." And that is very, very difficult to take care of that many people. But, social workers have about that many clients that they have to work with. And some of them, of course, are more troublesome than others. Counselors, it's the same thing. If somebody comes once a week, that's one thing, but a professional counselor sees probably a maximum of 20 people in a week, and that's a pretty full week if they do. But they don't see everybody every week, so they have, over time, probably thousands of clients if they stick with it, although the burnout rate amongst people in counseling is very high because they find that when they work with people and they make suggestions about how they might improve their life, that people don't change. And they don't change much, and they don't change fast. And then they might whine about the cost, and they have no idea that, like $100 an hour, for example, sounds like a lot of money, but somebody's got to pay for Christmas Day and vacation and infrastructure and so on. So it really isn't that much money when you look at it realistically. And some say, nah, well, I didn't get that much value. They were hoping that the counselor, the mentor, the person could actually do something for them. No, they've got to do the homework. They've got to make the changes individually. And we watch Jesus in the New Testament, and it's fascinating to me as to how many times he sends people out in pairs, two, how many times he delegates to one, or sometimes into a small group. And we don't know how efficient or how good they were. Our hunch is that they were far more efficient than the people we delegate things to today, where people, they get a bruise on their forehead and they say, oh, I promise I'll do that. And then they say, oh, I forgot. Because somehow it wasn't as important to them as it was to you. We are facing a terrific difficulty these days with the young crop of people who've come up through high school during the COVID years when they were sitting behind their computer screen and didn't have to personally relate to the teacher. And they, back in the day, the teacher would kind of swat you with a stick or something like that if you weren't paying attention. So there was a response mechanism there, but the teacher's kind of stuck on the side of their screen and the student on the side of their screen, and they can just flip the lid down. They can turn the camera off. They can play a game on their phone while they're pretending to, it was a terrible time for teenagers who didn't have the kind of supervision, support, and even the relationships around them because they were locked in their own bedroom doing their stuff. And so now those young adults, some of them, are saying, I think I want to serve Jesus, but they haven't developed just the common relational skills that everybody needs to develop. Like you teach a 3-year-old, say please and say thank you, and you say smile, and those basic things in life, they don't even know how to do it. And so we have a subject area here where we need to drill down deep and understand what is going on in the life of the church, or we will be in deeper trouble in the future if we have somebody who grows up and says, well, my mentor said that it's all about the preaching. Then they'll spend countless hours researching and developing and trying to make their sermons better. And they might be more factual, but will they be better? Because the object here is to move the person from where they are to where they need to be, which the Bible clearly teaches is to maturity in Christ. And if that's not happening, there's something broken. Either there's something broken in the heart and life and soul, or social relationships, the sociological or the psychological things, spiritual things, their inner sins and debates and so on. There's something wrong on that side, and that's often true. Or there's something wrong on the leader's side, not actually doing what would be the most impactful and effective for that individual. Our job is not to just be nice. It's to be helpful with people. And people don't like it when you're not nice. Well, when you're direct and you tell the truth. Jesus clearly had a strategy. He worked heavily with a small group of people, and we've been through that this last few weeks. But he lived with them, and I have said so many times, and I hope you picked it up, He invested the unwritten time of about 3,000 or plus kilometers of walking, 1,000 hours on the road with the group that were following him, which we think of as the 12, but there are apparently other people that were going along with him. That's really a stronger part of Jesus' ministry, even though it's unwritten for us. It does give us clues in several places, and we've covered that in previous lessons. One thing that you will notice, that we have noticed, and I think you've noticed, is that Jesus sent people out in pairs. And that has tremendous benefit to it. It has the accountability benefit. It has got the friendship benefit. It's got all kinds of things where one person might observe in one way and another, and they can collaborate and figure things out together. Pairs are really useful. I also have found in my work and in my study and development of things that triads, three people, is a very helpful way, particularly at the lower end of taking people into relationships, because the two can report to the one, and it doesn't so much feel like ganging up on them as it does when it's one-on-one. And sometimes Jesus sent them out in pairs, as we have noted, but sometimes he sent them out not in pairs. Not many of these recorded in the Bible. These kinds of interactions, there's about a half a dozen, maybe 7 of them in the New Testament, of these incidents of Jesus demonstrating his heart to delegate and pass things on. Judas is the one where he says, go take care of it quickly. And we don't have any evidence in John's gospel where that's recorded for us that it was a surprise to the disciples. If he always sent people out in pairs, then somebody might say, wait a minute, Jesus, who's going with Judas to do that? And we don't have any record of that. Now I'm arguing from silence there, of course, but it just seemed natural. It seemed an ordinary thing for Judas to be the treasurer of the group. And I wonder what the accountability mechanisms were. Apparently they weren't in there. So that didn't work out too well. And then when Jesus gives this very heartfelt personal commissioning to Peter, where he says, get out there and feed 3 times after the resurrection, we see him focusing on Peter, but without doubt, the other disciples had some connection with that and saw me too in that. So sometimes it was not in pairs. But what the pattern seems to tell us is that if it was an individual task, he sent them out 2 by 2. If it was a kind of a delegated role or a job, there seems to be this one person. There's an adage that says that if you have 2 friends who say they'll take care of your cat while you go on vacation, your cat will starve to death because each one will think the other guy's got the thing covered. And there's some truth in that. There always is a sense of, isn't there somebody else who's less busy than me, younger than me, healthier than me, richer than me, whatever than me, who should be doing this? Well, maybe they should, but they're not. And so you have to develop an attitude. And this is true wherever you stand in relation to your local church, inside it, deeply, or just on the edges of it. I like this saying. It's not the complete element of things, but it's 10 2-letter words. If it is to be, it is up to me. Now, you don't want to load the whole world on your shoulder, but you do want to say, I see that. Nobody else seems to see that. I'd better do it. Whether it's just a simple thing in a habit of life of walking past a piece of garbage on the pathway to pick it up and get it into the garbage bin, or something deeply significant in the life of the church that isn't happening. And, we've gone through a generation of people trying to say, I find this really interesting, what's your spiritual gift? And that opened up as wide as a truck driving through it, the opportunity for them to say, that one's not my gift. I don't want to do it. Well, it may not be a gift, but it is your responsibility. And when you see something, say something, is the saying today, and take some level of responsibility. Now, uh, it seems that leaders sometimes, particularly, it's argued, and I can't prove this scientifically, but it's probably true, in smaller churches, um, the leader, the pastor, refuses to delegate or thinks it would be less of him if he delegates. And sometimes in churches, I've heard people say, he works for us, as if the pastor is the gopher. Well, you know, it's not a great idea. It's not a good way to build the kingdom. If we're going to do what Jesus wants us to do and get this message out to the whole world, we've got to get better at delegating. And if the reasons that people give for not delegating are worth looking at, and you can do some thinking about them on your own. Nobody can do it as well as I can. No, probably not. What's your point? Your point is that they'll never do it as well as you can unless you show them how. Be the demonstration before them and lead them, and the better you do it, the less chances are that they will be willing to do it. So you don't need to be so perfect. This isn't a performance. This is about building up people. They don't want to get in trouble for not doing it. The list just goes along and on and on. Somewhere along the line, sometimes people just don't trust others because they trusted somebody else and that person failed them once, and so they say, once bitten, twice shy. They think that training takes too long, and it does. If it takes 1 hour to do something and you do it yourself, it's done. But the problem is if you don't take somebody else along with you to invest an hour and a half, you'll have to do it the second time, the third time, and the fourth time. Whereas if you take an hour and a half the first time and explain why you're doing with what you're doing with the person, and the person says, oh, I didn't see that. And then you walk with them the second time and you kind of stand back and watch them do it and say, don't forget this, and be careful about that. And they say, oh, yeah, I'd forgotten that little point. After 2 or 3 sessions with even a simple task, they'll be able to do it on your own and you'll never have to do it again. And so it takes too long to train them is not smart, because it does take long to train people. You can do it better. They might be very inefficient at first, but they'll never get more efficient if you don't give them the opportunity and train them in that. But I am concerned that with people leading in local churches, that they sometimes don't believe that the body works. Somehow, they've developed flawed answers to the questions such as, do you really think you're that indispensable? You're not. I'm not. I had an older deacon one day said, you might think you're making an impact when you stick your fist in the ocean, but when you pull it back out, everything goes back to normal. I thought, yeah, that's pretty much true. I think sometimes those who are leading in churches actually need an attitude checkup, and their narcissistic tendencies to say, oh, everybody's saying what a good job I did. I like it when people give me the praise. No, don't say that. Well, but please say it more. Oh, and then you can pretend you're humble and so on. It's such a nonsense game that some people do, and you've got to look at your own attitude. Who are you doing it for? And if others fail around you, like the old chorus that we used to sing that I think I still sung sometimes is, I've decided to follow Jesus, though no one join me, still I will follow. And that becomes the question, and it can be lonely when others aren't picking it up yet, but they may pick it up later. And if they don't, you can still follow Jesus, and it will make a difference. It's a challenge to find somebody who will actually follow you. They might say they will, and then when the going gets tough and you might slip up a little bit, or they think you slipped up a little bit, then they might turn on you and kind of complain about everybody else about how bad of a leader you were, and they would have done very well if you'd have been a better leader. And on it goes. It happens. And there's nothing you can do to change the nature of humanity, but there is something you can do to change your own nature and be the person who gives others the opportunity to become more than they are. This is made to work by God himself outside of the Gospels here, where Paul, in talking about the spiritual gifts thing, and one person's this way and another person's that way, never mind the details about the gifts. This is the point I want to get to, is he says, in fact, God has placed the parts, the members, if you like, in the body. Now, he's used a physical body illustration here, but he's really talking about the participants in local churches, which we use the term members for typically. He's placed them in there. Who did it? God did it. They think they joined, and they did. But it's God's initiative that gives them the faith to believe that brought them to the circumstances of life that they're there. And they're there at this particular moment in time for that very direct purpose because God put them there. Every one of them. No exceptions. Everyone. Now, what does that include? That includes the babies. That includes the 3-year-olds who might be able to help you pick up some garbage on the church floor. You can start delegating very early with people, just as he wanted them to be. So this whining and complaining of, I don't have anybody, is not true according to Paul. And I believe Paul was inspired when he says this. The people you've got now are the people that God gave you, and they're the people that you have to work with. And so you better get better at working with them, as bad as they may be, as inefficient and as unfaithful as they may be. They're the parts in the body that you have. I don't care whether you got a dozen people or 1,200 people. God's placed them there. And you have to take them all seriously. The other element that I think is very important is when I took my first church, I think this is one of the first sermons I preached, and I think it was in a Sunday evening service, where I was saying, I can't do it all. I'm not called by God to do it all. Now, some people want to put some emphasis on the first part of this, where he said God gave some apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. And there's some merit in that, and that alongside of all the other things of gifts. In this case, the persons are the gifts. God gave different kind of people to the church to provide, clearly in the passage, to provide leadership. And what is the leadership that they're supposed to do? Well, the Bible, the most common term for leadership in the New Testament is a variation of the word servant, which is often the basis slave. So you're serving others. You're not demanding, controlling others. You're serving others in the life of the church. But serving them for what purpose? So to equip God's people. For what? For better intellectual capacity? No. For works of service. It isn't so much as what you know, it's how you learn to act. Works of service, actual works of service. And he did that so that the workload will be spread across the body of believers, so that it carries on until the maturity comes out the other end and it's all finished up. And you can read the text, and I hope that you'll go look it up and think about it as to how much are you, when you're sitting behind your computer screen, having the intention of equipping others so that they can do works of service. Maybe not the same works that you do, because you're all different, but works of service. And so you've got to kind of mull over and just noodle the idea of how am I going to get this person to do works of service. And it's so easy to pick up a work of service that somebody else does and just do it yourself. But it's not useful to do that. It's helpful to demonstrate that you know how to do things, but it's also very important that you teach others how to do things and get them into the place of serving the Lord through works of service. That's how they will grow. So how you demonstrate it? Well, you demonstrate. You demonstrate it by proving that no task is beneath you. You can do it. You can get involved in things, and you show them how, and then you ask them to do it, and they mess up with it, and you help them, and you monitor them without scolding them, and say, okay, that's a good try, but notice you have to do it this way to get it right, or else it won't turn out right. Adjust their thinking, and then once they do it a little bit, and you're watching, and you can move off a little, and it will take more work over and over, and repetition, and eventually the person can be given a responsibility. It was the new, I can't even remember the title, but pastor of Christian education at a church back in the day. And the man, a wonderful guy, who is very old, much younger than me, but had taken on the responsibility of being the Sunday school superintendent for this rather large church. And he had it working. But one of the things he stressed when he recruited somebody to teach a class that we had departmentalized, I don't know, there was close to 100 workers in this Sunday school. He stressed on them, didn't train them, but he stressed on them when they took the job that one of their responsibilities, if they weren't able to be there on a given Sunday, it was their responsibility to find somebody else to take their place. And he was very resolute about that. I hadn't put as much emphasis on that, but I saw how much wisdom that was, because otherwise, everybody'd be saying, I'm going away on vacation next week, so you have to find somebody else to do it. No, if you're going on vacation, you don't think about it next week. You have to think about it 3 or 4 or 5 weeks before to say, in the week of such and such, since I'm going to be on vacation, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to help me by taking over my Sunday school class. Oh, I don't know if I can do that. I said, well, I'll sit down with you and help you with the materials. He sees this further delegation. It was all built in to the way my friend did back then. And he taught me something. I'd been through school for it to learn how to do this, but he had a better focus on that particular part of the ministry. I actually never saw him teach a class, but he worked with the people to get them to make sure that they replicated themselves if they couldn't be there. It was a good point. So what are we going to do? Well, if you get the process right, you can trust the process. Or as we would say in Canada, the process. This is really not that complicated, and it doesn't take a manual this thick. It takes an attitude and a posturing of your life to say, my job is to work myself out of a job. My job is to work smart by working myself out of a job. And some people might see that as laziness, but it's not really laziness when you get it right. And we all have to grasp that people grow if they're given the right materials to grow with, but they do grow slowly generally. And they don't grow as much as we wish, generally. But people do grow over time. And sometimes it's long after your first-hand work with them that they start to recognize, oh, I learned that back in the day and didn't pay attention to it, but it made a difference to me. And I'm passing that on to someone else. See, knowledge is okay, but knowledge doesn't get the job done. It's activity that gets the job done. Love is not something you feel, it's something you do. So an act of service is an act of love. And so when you act, it makes a difference in people's lives. Action is this soil in which growth can happen. And it's the same thing with responsibility. The more responsibility you are taking, the more you have the access to the growth that God wants to have you have in your life. And it's your job. I don't care whether you're paid or unpaid or whatever. It's your job to get other people to serve the Lord and do what they're. It's a difficult thing because not everybody's going to get it all the time. People are going to fail. They're going to promise to be there, and then they're not going to show up. Well, if you don't follow up and say, I was shocked, disappointed, help me understand what went wrong, then you won't know and they won't grow. And if you don't know and they don't grow, then the whole thing is broken down. It is always our responsibility to demonstrate what we want others to become. And yeah, that gets hard because not everybody gets it, but some will. And that's how the process works. It's how it's always worked. If you look back at the disciples, that's exactly what happened with them with Jesus. You know, when Peter and John were sent off to make the preparations for the upper room meal, if they didn't do it, they would have been in a peck of trouble, wouldn't they? But they did it. And when they set off to get the donkey for them for the triumphal entry, that's a fascinating story. What happened if they came back and said, "Well, we were too afraid to ask. I wasn't sure of the address, so we wouldn't have had the donkey entering Jesus entering the gates." But we did because people followed through and set an example for us. And with all those examples and with all that encouragement, with all that training, it should make a big difference to how you operate in the life of your church and how I operate in mine.